Okay, so today you're going to want to grab some of your scraps and some of your scraps of batting and layer cake, because today I'm going to be showing you how to make a quilt as you go quilt that is reversible. All right, so for this project, you're going to need some scraps of batting, some 10-inch squares, and some scraps of fabric. So I have 16 pieces of batting here that I cut to 8-inch squares, and then I'm going to use the same amount of 10-inch squares. I have this really cute bundle here that is a nice mixture of blues and yellows. And then you can see I'm doing something a little bit different. I have a bunch of kind of low tone scraps here. So we all get all different kinds of scraps building up, and I always see fun and wild scrappy ideas for bright and crazy fabrics, but I thought I'd do something a little bit different here, and let's just see how it turns out. So to start, I'm just going to use one of my scraps of batting, and I'll just be building on to this square. Now, the fun thing about doing a scrappy quilt like this is you can really do this however you want. You could use a bunch of really tiny pieces and build up on this block, or you could use big pieces and make it go really fast. It's kind of just up to you and the look you want. I'm going to kind of do a mixture of both because I have all kinds of scraps here. So say I want to use this as my first piece. One, I may want to press it, but if I have this as my first piece, I can go over here and kind of see what else I have that could fit around it. This is kind of on the wilder side of my scraps. So this one could fit nice here and sew it down, and it may even fit kind of nice across here. So if I decide to put it there, what I would do is sew a 1/4 inch seam along here. So let me show you that. All right, so now that I have that seam sewn, you could leave it like this and press it open, press it over. Kind of, this is a stitch and flip where we're building on this foundation. So you could just flip it over, and if you don't see through anything, you could leave it like that. If you want to reduce the bulk, you could grab your scissors and just kind of trim that away. You could do it like that, or you could, if you're still able to, fold it over and use a ruler and your rotary cutter. All right, so if you got rid of the excess and then you're flipping it over, this is a good time to press the seam if you would like to, or you can keep building your block. Now, one thing that I want to warn you is that if you are going to press the seam with heat, is to think about the batting you're using, because some batting is synthetic, some is made from polyester, and it could melt under your iron. So if you are using polyester batting, make sure you just finger press really well and build out your block. I'm using 100% cotton batting, so for me it'll be okay if I press on this, but just keep that in mind. All right, so then I'm just going to keep building out this block just like that. Because I put this big piece on here already, it's not going to take me much time at all to finish this block. So I would just go through all of my scraps and just see what I think might work. And the thing that is fun about this is you can overlap a lot if you want to get a different look. So if I really want this piece to go here, but I don't want it to get cut off if I do a 1/4 inch seam right there at that point. See how I'd be missing a little bit of it? I can just adjust this up, and I'll lose a little bit of this fabric, but it'll be a little bit easier for me to build this block out more if I go ahead and go to the point over here. So hopefully that made sense for you. Now I want to show you here, because this was already sewn down, if I want to trim away that excess, I'm going to have to snip some of these stitches a little bit. So, you know, you just have to make the decision if you want to go through that kind of task of pulling out stitches for this, or if you're just fine with the bulk being there. So if you pull out the stitches, you can snip a few and then you can still trim away that excess, or you could just fold that over and be okay with the little bit of extra bulk there. It just really depends on, you know, what you're looking for on this. If it's just a little bit, it's probably not going to get in your way too much. So I'm already loving how this is turning out. I feel like it's going to be a very calm quilt. So let's get some gray in here. Well, is it gray? It kind of has some brown hints to it. I think it'll go great across here, but it may work there as well. But I think we'll go here. And I'm actually going to cut this one in half, or what looks like might be half to me. And we'll put that across here. All right, so there's not a lot of excess here. I'm just going to snip this off kind of a little bit easier with the scissors and press this like we have been. Now you'll notice we've gone over the batting in a few areas. That's fine. We're going to trim this all up after we build this block all the way up. So this is that same fabric here, so you can kind of make the decision, do you want to put a lot of the same fabrics in one block or have it a mixture of a bunch of different fabrics? It's really up to you and the look you're going for. So it's really going to be hard for you to see, but this is some really nice like tone on tone fabrics, and I think I'm going to place that across here. There's like little kind of tiny squares on it, and it's really cute. So we're going to put that right across here. And this is just what we're going to do. We're going to keep building up this block until it's completely full. So once this block gets completely full, I'll show you what we do next. All right, so now that the block is completely covered, it is looking pretty crazy. But what we're going to do is, for me, it's easier this way. I like to flip it over, and then hopefully you have a square ruler, because I feel like it makes it so much easier. What I do, because I know I need this block to be 8 inches, and sometimes the batting can really distort and get wonky and change everything. I'll line this up the best I can to get a nice 8-inch square around here and cut. All right, and then I'm going to flip it the other direction and do the same thing. So I'm going to line up that 8-inch and make sure it's all in the right spot in every other direction and cut around. And then I'll look and see if any of these pieces are large enough to make sure that I can use them. If they're not, they'll go in a scrap bag that could be used to stuff, you know, pillows, dog beds, anything like that. So now our block still looks pretty crazy, but it is a square now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all of the rest of my blocks done, and I'll show you what we're going to do with them. All right, so I have all of my scrappy panels finished. I really love how they turned out. It's kind of fun seeing them in such lighter colors and more, you know, muted tones. It's They're really cute. I'm excited about this. So now what we're going to do is grab one of our 10-inch squares and we're going to put it wrong side up. All right, so I'm going to put my ruler 1 inch in along the side of my 10-inch square, and you can see it comes to 10 inches on both sides. And then I'm going to line up my panel so it lays right at the 1 inch mark and it stops 1 inch before the edge. Now once I get it in place, I'm just going to go ahead and take a second look around it to make sure that there's 1 inch on all sides. Now if it's a little off, it'll be okay, because the way we're bringing this together, a little bit will be okay. So I'm going to put some pins in, and I'm going to get 2 prepped so I can kind of show you what we're doing, because we'll need 2. All right, so now you have a few options. You can quilt this panel to which will be your backing fabric on your quilt, or you can just do what I'm going to do and stitch around the outside about 1/8 of an inch. Now, something you'll want to keep in mind is whatever you stitch on the back of this panel, if you go past the edge of the batting and it's not all nice and clean, it's going to show up on the final product. So that's why I'm just going to stitch around the outside of this panel 1/8 of an inch, so it'll be a little less noticeable. One thing fun that you could do is use some colorful thread and hand stitch on here if you would like to. That'll keep it, you'll be able to keep it a little more clean, because you could sink your stitches when you get close to the edge. So that's some ideas there, but I'm going to stitch around these really quick and then I'll show you what we're going to do. All right, so now that I've basted around the panels, you see we have all this kind of border of the 10-inch square. Now what we're going to do is bring the 10-inch square right sides together, and you're going to want to kind of not only think about matching the ends of the 10-inch square, but also feel through and line up the batting with each other. So I'm going to put some pins through the thicker part here. And I can feel I need to actually move this over. All right, so now you're going to sew and try to stay along the stitched line you have. And it's going to be kind of hard to match up both sides, but just stay as close as you can. All right, so now you have these pieces that are kind of stuck together, and you're going to flip it, and you'll want to press the seam. And here is the fun part. You're going to fold the raw edge down into the edge of your panel square, and then fold it over again so you're hiding that raw edge. And then you'll press along here. And you'll do the same thing for the other side. So fold in the raw edge. And what's fun is this will not only create a border around your panels, but your quilt finishes just that much faster, because you're quilting it as you're sewing your panels, and you're creating this cute little border around your blocks, and it really finishes everything off nicely. This is a nice way to make a quilt if you have like a smaller sewing machine that doesn't have a large throat space, because you're working on a block at a time. And it's also a fun way you could just work on these blocks and get a pile going from your scraps and then finish it off whenever you have time, because you could keep adding on to this. So what you're going to do here is top stitch across the edge of each of these folded over little border pieces. All right, so I have 2 of my blocks finished, and then I'm just going to keep adding on to this row, like just as I did before. I'm going to take another panel and a background or backing block. I'll center this in here. Once I get it nice and centered, I will go to the sewing machine and sew it in place. Just baste it in place just as I did before, and add it on to this row. So I'm going to have 4 in this row, and I'll have 4 rows down. So I'll show you what to do when you get your rows finished, because you can make this quilt as big as you want. You can keep adding more blocks onto yours if you would like. The rows will come together the same way, so I'll show you how to do that when I get my rows finished. Okay, so let's stop for a minute and chat. I started really struggling bringing these blocks together. The foundation part with the stitch and flip was really easy and a lot of fun. But once I got to assembling these blocks and getting them ready to quilt as you go, it just wasn't lining up and working out the way I wanted it to. The batting kept shifting around on the 10-inch layer cake blocks, and it was really not turning out the way I wanted it to. So I just stopped working on it for a bit, actually for the rest of the day. And so after thinking about it for a bit, I was really able to troubleshoot and figure out what was probably happening with these blocks. And I have some tips for you after all that trial and error that I think are really going to help you out. Now, I'm going to show you a before and after picture. Now, there is a before of how my blocks were looking, and you can definitely see the shift in how the batting and that beautiful stitch and flip moved, and they were not lining up at all. And then when I implemented all these tips I'm going to give you, it lines up so much better. You'll really see the difference in both of the blocks. So I'm really excited to share all these tips with you, because I think they're really going to help you a lot if you make a quilt like this. And you really should, because it is a lot of fun. Okay, so my first tip for you is to see if you have an 1/8 inch foot or some sort of narrow foot that can get right up next to the batting, or even just balance on the batting when you're stitching around the block. So I have an 1/8 inch foot that worked perfect for this. It just sat right on the edge of the batting when I was doing that base stitch all the way around. Now, here's what my 1/8 inch foot looks like. You can see how narrow it is, but this was really key to helping me stay right on the edge of the batting, since it's raised up so much higher than the layer cake that's sitting below. Before, with my 1/4 inch foot, it was just kind of wanting to fall off the edge, so it was hard to stay balanced up there. So this really helped a lot. All right, so my tip number 2 is, if you have this ability on your sewing machine, raise your presser foot a little bit. Oh my goodness, this made a huge difference on my quilt. All those layers together really wanted to make my presser foot push the batting along instead of just gliding on top of it. So it really stretched everything out really wonky. So if you have that ability to raise your presser foot a little bit, definitely do that. It made a world of a difference for me. All right, so now that we took care of the setup on the machines, let's talk about some other things I did to really make these blocks turn out so much better. All right, so for tip number 3, we're going to mark that 1-inch mark around the layer cake blocks on the wrong side. So before I was showing you how I laid my ruler down and lined up the block and then tested all the way around it to make sure the inch is lined up everywhere. While that was a lot faster, I really realized that laying that block down in that way and kind of measuring it out didn't leave it very accurate because of the next steps that I did. So just take the extra time and mark around the block and get that line lined up. I use a friction pen because it'll just heat erase, but a pencil or something like that that isn't going to show through to the right side of the fabric will work as well. All right, so for my tip number 4, we're going to toss those pins away. That was just not working out like I hoped. So if you remember before, I showed adding some pins onto our lovely stitch and flip scrappy panel. All right, so what I realized was by laying the block down on the layer cake and putting those pins in, it was kind of shifting the fabric around and shifting my block around. It just wasn't working out like I had hoped. So instead, since we marked all those lines, we're going to spray baste the panel onto that larger 10-inch square. Trust me, it works so much better. I know we marked all those blocks and that adds more time, and then now spray basting this and putting it on is going to add a little bit more time, but trust me, it really made a difference. So what I did was I put down a cardboard box that I had laying around, and I laid the 10-inch square wrong side up so I could see that outline, and then I spray basted onto the batting side, so the back of that scrappy panel. Now the reason I didn't spray again onto those 10-inch squares is because you're going to get some overspray, and remember, we have to press those later. We want to press that binding up that finishes off our blocks for the quilt as you go process, and a hot iron and spray based glue does not mix. So spray the back of the scrappy panel on the batting, and all the overspray will just get on the box, and then we'll just flip it over and line it up in that square. We have everything all marked up, and it really comes together a lot better. So once I get it lined up, I just press it down. I'm telling you, you're not going to have those bumps. You're not going to shift as much. It's much better than using the pins. And that will take us to my tip number 5. Okay, so I'm going to add on a few more steps for you guys, but trust me, it really makes a difference. After I get that panel lined up on the 10-inch square, I'm going to press it, and that will just ensure any bumps or anything that's not smooth on the blocks will get all evened out. And I'm going to show you some more before and after pictures, but I'm telling you, all these steps make a world of a difference. You will see it in these blocks, and especially when I bring the rows together, it is amazing how much these tips really helped these blocks look so much nicer and so much cleaner. Okay, so I really hope all these tips that I gave you with this Quilt As You Go project were helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed me taking the time to kind of walk you through what went wrong in my quilt and how I was able to fix it. I think I might start doing this more often. Usually I make a demo project and work through the kinks, and then create a video for that project that has kind of all of that already worked through. So just let me know in the comments if you like me just jumping right into a project and then letting you know what went wrong and how I fixed it. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. I know this video can get a little bit longer when I do that, so I want to make sure that you are liking it and that you see the value in seeing all my mistakes. All right, so now that I worked you through all the tips I had for this Quilt As You Go project, let's get back to working through the rest of the steps. Now we're going to be moving on to bringing the rows together. All right, so now that I have 2 rows with 4 blocks in it, I'm going to sew these together. Now it's actually really simple because we're going to do the same thing that we did with just 2 blocks. We're going to bring the back of the quilt right sides together, line it up, pin and sew right along the edge of the batting as close to the stitches that we can get. So all you'll want to do is line up your seams and put some pins in. You could use clips if you want to as well. So I'm going to get these seams lined up first. You can see where they meet. And then I'll add some other pins along here as well, just to make sure I keep everything nice and straight. All right, so I'm going to sew along the edge of the batting straight across here, and I'll show you what we're going to do next. All right, so my background isn't pretty again. I have the box down, but that's just because I'm going to be ironing this. And while I can press on this mat with my tiny little wool mat for short periods, not for long periods, I don't want to warp my cutting mat. So we're going to put the ugly box down just for a little bit. All right, so now that I have it sewn across here, you can see the back, the seam is all sewn. Now, just as before, we're going to be pressing the seams on the front open, folding them in again and pressing down and top stitching. And it really starts to bring this whole quilt as you go quilt together really fast. I mean, you can see how quickly a technique like this can bring a quilt together. And I really think it's so fun because you can just start working on these scrap blocks whenever you have some extra time and really want to sew but don't want to, you know, plan out a new big project. You could get some of these blocks sewn up and, you know, just have them in a pile for when you're ready to bring a quilt together. And it's so quick to make it whatever, or it's not quick, but it's easy to make this type of quilt whatever size you want. You just decide on your, you know, block size and cut your square, your backing squares larger than it, so you have 1 inch all the way around. And whatever size your block is, that's the size it's going to stay. So this quilt, when it's all said and done, is going to be 32 inches long. If I add more blocks, you just keep adding that 8 on, so you can easily get it whatever size you want. All right, so we have it pressed open, and now we just fold those raw edges under and in. It's so easy. So I'm going to get these folded and pressed and just top stitch across them. I mean, seriously, this just comes together so fast. Okay, so check it out. Here is 2 rows sewn together. Now, these are all blocks that I used my tips on. So I made my initial 2 rows and was just very upset with how they turned out. They kind of got wonky and crazy from all the stretching and all the things I talked to you about. With these, I utilized all of the tips I showed you. So I want to give you that comparison. So here is the first rows I did, and you can even see on the edges how wavy it is because of all the funkiness that went on, and this lays so flat. So there initially you can see that, but look through here with all the waviness and some of the stitches from the back coming forward because of how much everything moved around. Now, a few of them worked out well and a few areas look well. Good. A few areas look good. Oh my word. So I'm going to still use this because so be it. This is what happened. But just know, if you use the tips I gave you, if you go a little bit slower and work through the process, you know, with putting a little bit more into each step. I know drawing the squares onto the background here first and spraying it and ironing again is all going to make this take a little longer, but you can see how worth it is. So all I have to do now is stitch this row together, same as before. Put the stitches through here, press the seam open, fold under, and then when I get to the binding, it's the same thing. Just stitch it over and top stitch, and I'll show you this quilt all finished. And you guys, I didn't time this quilt like I did that other one that just recently went up. What a fun video showing how long it took me. I didn't time this, but what I can tell you is doing all these blocks and doing the quilt as you go method to bring them all together. This project only took me 2 days, and that's not working the full 2 days. I maybe worked 2 to 3 hours on these first rows that got all wonky, and then the same on this one, and that's going much slower on this one. And this one I'm going to have a finished quilt, completely finished. It's quilted. All right, let me get it sewn up so that I can show it to you. All right, so my quilt as you go quilt is finished, and what I love about this method is that this quilt is reversible. So on the one side we have all of our scrappy little panels, and on the other side it's just a cute simple patchwork. I absolutely love how this turned out, and as you can see from how it's constructed, you can really make it as large or as small as you want. So I think that's so much fun, because if you're working on a domestic sewing machine or something like that, this way of constructing a quilt will really make it easier for you to make a really large quilt even on a domestic machine. Because let me tell you, all I have is a domestic machine, and it can be a struggle when you get up to those larger quilts. So I really hope you enjoyed this project, and let me know in the comments what you thought of it, if you've made one like this before or if you're thinking of making one. I would love to hear about it and especially see pictures. So if you do make one, if you're in my Facebook group, go ahead and share it whenever you make it, or share your progress. I'd love to see it. If you're not in the Facebook group, down in the description you can click on the link and join if you would like to. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.